Good evening. This is a Sunday evening talk for Arch Street Friends, also known as the monthly meeting of Friends of Philadelphia, Quaker group in Philadelphia. And today we're going to be talking about racism. I'm Susanna Dodgson, and I'm just coordinating the discussion. This is a discussion. So we want to know what racism is, what people think it is, and we have a whole lot of questions that we'd like to talk about. But first of all, we're going to have short talks from Jamie Yingst and from Stephanie Collins-Frempong, who will be talking just for a little bit. So Jamie, please start.
So I won't take too long. I just want to introduce myself in terms of me personally, but also academically, what my background is. As Susanna said, my name is Jamie Yingst. I'm a professor of psychology with mostly a focus on social cognition, but more specifically implicit bias and belief formation, particularly why we endorse conspiracy theories. And then something else called terror management theory, which describes the role of death in life and how fostering a healthy relationship and acceptance of death can really lead us to live very more meaningful lives otherwise. But on the flip side of that same coin, we are not utilizing healthy ways of managing terror, the terror that accompanies this knowledge we all have of life and death. And that leads us to have worldviews. And some of those worldviews may be racist. Some of them may be, religiously, kind of a religious lens. Or in my case, I look at the conspiracist lens, why people, they see their worldview goes through this new lens of theirs. And I personally think that bigotry of all kinds, but specifically racism, definitely is tied to kind of the fabric of our system, right? And how we take accountability for what we have and what we don't have. I think when we step back and we look at it not so much about race, but about bigotry, I think that opens the door for a larger group of individuals to push towards a more equitable, arena in the U.S. But we can't tease apart the racial aspect of just bias because it is so ingrained in our society. So I think it's important to talk about it specifically and with care. The very first thing that I studied academically in graduate school was police bias in the young Black male, chiefly because of the murders of Trayvon Martin and more so Eric Gardner at the hands of the New York City police. So for me, I'm in a weird position because I'm a white passing cis male, but I'm fully Asian American. That's how I've always seen myself. I've never ever thought of myself as being fully white. So I'm kind of trapped between these two designations, and often, especially yesteryear, I would always have to pick other or mixed race or something, and that never, captured what I am as well. But I think it's very important for me to acknowledge that because I'm white passing, I have every single advantage of white privilege that people who are fully white have, because I don't appear very Asian. So that's kind of me in a nutshell and why I came to be so, interested in advocating for a more equitable place, specifically with racism.
Are you ready for? Okay, hi, I am Stephanie Collins-Frempong. I am originally from Chicago, Illinois, and I live right now in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am an educator. This is year 28 for me as an educator. Racism, things that we have as an African-American female, the things that I have experienced. Malcolm X said that Black female is one of the most unprotected things on right now. Is not protected by anyone, not from the Black male, from the white male, from the white female. We always stood alone, all the way from the beginning since slavery, having our children taken away from us, being raped in front of our husbands, no one there to protect us. So this has developed into this strong Black female that you see now in today's, as you can see in society, you see how Black women are elevating themselves to higher levels in America, and they're doing it by themselves, as they say. They say the first thing you might hear from a woman who's never been married and have no children, I don't need a man, because Black women have been taught that since the beginning, because they have taken the Black male out the house. They took our children, so we had to learn how to survive, right? In a lot of aspects, when I go to the store, the things that we do when we talk about experiencing racism, when I walk into the store, I can see all eyes on me as a woman. As I walk, I can hear I can look at people watching me to see if I'm going to take something or see if something's going to happen. I have one example when an incident happened. It was probably about 15, 16, it might have been 17 years ago. I was on Southwest Airline, and so I was running late, and I was the last person to get on. So it was 2 seats. It was a couple. It was an extra seat back there as well, but they didn't want me to sit next to them. The other lady I couldn't sit next to because it was too tight. So she had a very nasty attitude, a white lady. As we were getting off the plane, I guess the stewardess let them know that there was a conflict going on. But when I got to the counter, they assumed I was the one who started the conflict. I didn't say anything. The conflict was the voice, and the person who did all the commotion was the lady that was white. But because the assumption was that me as a Black female, I was the one who started the conflict, and I did not. And so he had to look, and when she started screaming and hollering, he realized, oh my God, I made a mistake. It wasn't her. So we, as a Black female, I experience in jobs and opportunities and things, we have to be perfect to get those type of opportunities. Perfect. So that's my story, and I can talk some more about it as we go on. So.
Anyone have any comments from listening to Jamie and Stephanie? Well, here I gave you 22 questions.
Okay.
Let's jump to 5. Is America racist? Well, we just heard an example of it. I mean,
Yes.
one thing, as a teacher of medical writing, which I was for a number of years, and as a trained scientist, one thing that I know people do is make generalizations from small information. And of course, that's what's happening too in the United States about racism. It's like, there's no racism. We had a Black president. It's like, you can't jump from one to assume that everyone else is able to become president. I grew up in Australia, and Australia was a very racist country when I grew up, and we knew that. I mean, which was shocking to me, because before I went to Australia when I was 9, I lived in New Zealand. And in New Zealand, I've since discovered where I was living was in Gisborne, it had the highest proportion of Maoris living there than anywhere else in New Zealand. And Maoris were in my class, and they were so cool. They played musical instruments. They were just amazing. And we learned Maori songs. I mean, everyone thought Maoris were really cool. And then I go to Australia, and all I hear is, oh, abos, they're all drunks. That was the kind of things that I was hearing all the time. This attitude that there was something basically wrong with the Aborigines. Not that everything had been stolen from the Aborigines. Not that the British had tried to genocide them and actually had succeeded in parts. And then when I was 15, there was a referendum in Australia to decide whether or not Aborigines should be Australian citizens. And this was pretty shocking. I mean, you know, I went to a selective high school for girl geniuses, which I wasn't, but somehow or other I got in. And we were all absolutely appalled that that should even be a question. So, I mean, bit by bit, just from living in New Zealand and seeing what was going on, I mean, my consciousness was being raised. When I was 14, I became very good friends with a neighbor of mine, he was 3 years older than me, and he was a university student. And he was involved in the movement, civil rights movement in Australia for Aborigines. So he was going in the mornings and giving them breakfast, and in the evenings he was tutoring them, and he was a teacher. He died a few years ago. Very sad. But I mean, I saw people really trying hard to change things, to change this idea that there are people that are lesser, which is what racism is. And Aborigines, the native Australians, have come a long way since the 1960s, but they're still not there completely. There's still problems. The Aboriginal people in Australia are closer to Native Americans here. The British wanted to start bringing trafficked humans from Africa to Australia, but a governor stopped it right from the start. So it didn't happen in Australia, but that was actually a fluke. But so the issue in Australia of racism, it's a different type of racism. But then when I came to the United States, I thought, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Why are people racist? And I still don't get it. And that's a problem too of liberals, because it's just that racism is so absurd that a lot of people believe it doesn't exist because it's so stupid.
An interesting thing about the Aussie Aboriginals is that they are the closest genetically to the original diaspora leaving Africa. So we know them to be like basically of all different peoples and ethnicities that are still alive, they are the oldest, most truest to the original human. So for them to be treated so poorly is ironic, or that they're less of a race, or they're the most original of people still. So
yeah. So anyway, what do you say when people tell you that that America is not racist? Can anyone talk to that?
Yeah, I could speak on that. When people say that America is not racism, imagine, you can just look right now what's going on in the country. You put President Obama versus President Trump up there, and you say if President Obama even did one thing similar to that, what would have happened to him and his family? They had to walk a tight line when he was president. And we have right now a white male that's getting away with selling out this country. And he's constant, is all of these things that are happening that's building up. A Black person wouldn't even got that far to get away with anything like that. So yes, the foundation of America was built on racism. What happened, the country started off, they were hurt people. They was first rejected from their country. So they were already hurt, angry. Then they were getting oppressed by the king. And so then they had to build up this country to prove themselves. They were getting all of these things that were happening. So first they started oppressing the Native Americans. Then the Irish, they brought the Irish over here to work. They needed someone to make them feel better about themselves because of what happened to them, the rejection that they felt from their country. So then they brought these indentured servants, Africans, over the port. They went over to Africa and got indentured servants at first, and they realized these people can work in the heat and they can help and they're good with agriculture, all different types of things. And then they decided amongst themselves, oh, we got a group of people that we can oppress. They took kindness for weakness. And they decided in order to oppress somebody, and in order to be able to have other people to co-sign on that, you have to make somebody believe that these people are less than human. And
Right.
That's what they did. And so those are the things, those are the tactics they use. And they've been continue to use these tactics. The first thing when they tell white women, or a black male to rape you, well, white men rape too. You know, they'll say this and that to put the fear. And so they had to sell this to the people, because humans are good. We are born to do the right thing, but we can be led to do the wrong thing. Sometimes our society, sometimes our environment causes us to do wrong things. But just like when you see a child 5 years old, the child is developing. And we as a society develop that child to what we want that child to believe in. Imagine if we teach children just to love each other and respect each other, look at the character of a person, right? So, yes, this country is racism. If we go get a job, or as an African-American female, a lot of opportunities, like I said, was not offered to me, that was offered to my counterparts. And I feel it every day. I see it, I feel it. When I go to the store, I see it. And when I go to different places, I see it. And I don't know what we can do to fix it. You know, it's going to start off with us starting off with the younger generation. It's not going, because it's going to be hard to change the minds. You know, we can all change ourselves to be a better person, but it's going to be difficult to change the minds of a man or a woman that's 60 or 70 years old. If you remember the story when the Israelites were after they left Egypt, and they were 40 years wandering. God said, you got to wait to this next generation, because it's things are not changing.
I think America is inherently racist. I mean, before America was America, you know, as Stephanie shared, people coming over immediately doing awful things immediately to natives and taking advantage of them. And you know, we had Manifest Destiny, just the ridiculousness that was slavery, right? And for how long it existed in the U.S. We have, you know, mass genocide of, you know, quote unquote savage natives, right? They weren't Christian, they weren't the right color. We needed to, you know, we're doing them a favor by baptizing them and then slitting their throats and letting them die. You know, around a corner of a tree line is how it happened, and thousands all at once. We can look even just the basic formation of policing in the U.S., modern day policing. It stems from runaway slave wranglers. So while I don't think it's fair to say that you know, every cop is inherently racist, but every cop is choosing to be a part of an inherently racist organization, and so they're condoning. We can trace it back to not just the runaway slave wranglers, but then this whole myth that people of color, especially young Black males, were very criminal. And that started a very long time ago, that just basically post-bellum. And even though Lincoln is heralded as, you know, as emancipating, you know, slaves and Blacks in our country, he also purposely left in the 13th Amendment a clause basically saying that the only time slavery was allowed was for prisoners. So what happened? They started making up ridiculous laws like, oh, you're out past 7 o'clock and you're Black, you're a criminal. You looked at a white woman, you're a criminal. And so this is where this criminality of blacks started. And there was a movie, designed and made that became quite famous and even played at the White House. That was the formation of the Ku Klux Klan. So we know how awful our history is, but we can even fast forward to today, and we actually don't see a large difference. I think like overt racism has gone down, but implicit racism has probably gone up. It's less favorable to say racist or bigoted things. I mean, obviously, Trump has given people a green light to do that, but it's nothing like it used to be. But people are just quietly being racist still, or behind closed doors. I shouldn't say it's one of my favorite studies, but one of the most impacting studies I've ever seen in psychology looked at both police officers and just the average citizen. And there was no difference between the two groups, but they were tasked with seeing these photos of Black children and white children. And on average, even including people of color who were part of the study, they saw a Black person, a Black child at 13.2 years of age. And they assume that person, that child, is an adult. And when we do the same thing for white people, it extends into the early 30s, where we still say a white man is still, boys will be boys. It's still coming to fruition in age. So that gap is all you need to know to help explain why 11-year-old Tamir Rice could be shot, playing with a fake gun by himself, in a park. And probably why when we see a bunch of biker gangs get arrested for shooting each other with shotguns and everything and assault rifles, they're not even handcuffed. There are photographs and videos of them along the side of the road talking with the police. I immediately think of, I forget what the group is called, but they were a far right-wing group that took over the some kind of building. I think it was in Oregon or Washington. It was some federal building, and then they had a standoff with the FBI, shooting assault rifles at them. And no one stormed that they did it peacefully. They got these people out. If they were people of color, they wouldn't have been patient at all. So I think we can see it in a lot of different ways. And one that I'll just leave with, because I think it will come back up again later, is the prison industrial complex, and how it is fueled still. Even a handful of months ago, we've heard audio and video clips of captains in the New York Police Department telling people below them that they have to basically arrest more Black and white men between ages 18 and 25. And it's been going on for years, even though it's illegal. So we know that, at least from the police perspective and criminal justice system, that Blacks and people of color are simply not treated the same way as white people. I think that's impossible to argue against.
Well, I in 2007, I started hanging out with Nigerians, and I went to Nigerian church, and then I went to Nigeria for the first time. And then I started there was Ghanaian church in Philadelphia, and Kenyans. And the people, because I'm a nerd, generally I hang out with people who are very well educated and very brilliant. And one thing that was extremely obvious to me right away was that all the men I knew with all these huge numbers of degrees and expertise, they just weren't hired at the same level as people I knew professionally who are of European origin. That to me, and one thing that often they were doing, and this was women as well, is they just kept getting more and more degrees. They'd have a medical degree, and that wasn't good enough. So then they'd get a pharmacy degree, and that wasn't good enough. So then they'd get a law degree. It's like, what do you have to do to keep on proving? I have 2 degrees. I've got my undergraduate degree and my honors undergraduate degree and my PhD, and that's it. I didn't get any more degrees. But that was just really, really shocking to me. But another thing that's really shocking to me is that you don't want to be around with people that don't like you. So what's happened since 1863 is there's been parallel evolution. So, I mean, you can see at our meeting house on Arch Street, I mean, you look around, I mean, we don't have much diversity. Our current clerk, Hazel, is an African-American, which is great, but she's rare. I mean, we have very few. And part of that problem, part of the reason for that is because Quakers were racists right from the start. Quakers were very happy to keep on having slaves. When Francis Pistorius, who was a Lutheran from Germany, wrote the Germantown, whatever it was, Declaration, he went to the Quakers and he said, you know, we've got to get rid of slavery. This was in 1689. And the Germantown Quakers said, yeah, this is a good idea. And they took it to Philadelphia. They took it to our meeting, and our meeting said, no, we like slaves. And George Fox, who of course was the founder of Quaker, he actually went to, I believe it was Jamaica, and he wrote a letter which essentially, he wasn't exactly praising slavery, but he wasn't saying it's a good idea to get rid of it. And another problem too is during the yellow fever epidemic around the end of the 18th century, initially the European, who were, I mean, they were mostly British in Philadelphia, they were all getting sick, but the Africans were not getting sick. So they sort of figured out that, the clever doctors figured out that maybe Africans are immune to it. And of course it wasn't that, it's just that the Europeans were closer to the source of the disease. And the Africans started dying just as rapidly as the Europeans. And then there was Richard Allen. Richard Allen was involved in, I'm probably garbling this, but Richard Allen was involved in working with a doctor who figured out a way of curing people with yellow fever. And then afterwards, he wanted to be a Quaker, and he was told to sit in the back. So he said, to hell with that, I'm going to invent a new church, the AME church, and which has been in existence since then. So racism exists because liberals don't think it exists. That's my thesis. If you don't think it exists, you ignore it and you're not making things better.
Yeah,
I think the way to get rid, we're hearing all about these book burnings in Florida and there's book bannings. And just this week, I was just shocked to see that there's actually a chapter in the Bible, in Ephesians, with Paul burning books from a whole lot of people that he didn't like now that they were Christian. So, and that's what's happening now. So these racists in the South, they know what they're doing, getting rid of books, getting rid of education, trying to destroy public education. I mean, Lois has talked about this before. I mean, if you want to get rid of racism or anything else that's awful in our society, and I can't think of many things that are worse than racism, but if you want to get rid of them, what you have to do is you have to educate people. And it's like we're fighting this huge battle and we're not even understanding that the enemy is fighting us. Yeah.
In my field, we differentiate between that old-fashioned prejudice, right? And that's like that blatant overt racism that I was talking about. But for me, a very good example of something called modern symbolic prejudice is the DNC. It's our liberals, basically, where they say they're for diversity and equity, and they act like they're championing it. But when it comes down to actually doing anything to promote it, they either don't do anything, or they actually they prevent it from happening. They get in the way. And that's what's probably most frustrating for a lot of people like ourselves watching these elections. I know for me, that gets under my skin quite a bit.
Well, Stephanie is a big deal in the Democratic Party. Maybe you can talk to that and the DNC. I mean, how upsetting are their policies to you?
Oh, what you mean? Say the question again. I didn't understand.
Well, Jamie's just saying that the DNC is working against getting rid of racism. Is that essentially what you said?
I think most people believe that they are for diversity and equity. So I don't think it's always an explicit thing that happens, but I think and sometimes it does. I just personally think that, the push for being together and oneness, and then when it comes down to actually doing it, and I say we, not me, but white people in general and the DNC have a different.
Yeah, but if the DNC is funding schools and health, that's a good thing.
Sure.
That's the issue. So can you talk to that, Stephanie?
About them funding schools and health and
yeah.
Okay, yeah. Free lunches and
free lunch.
Yeah, Lyndon B. Johnson, President Johnson started those initiatives. And when he started those initiatives, the Black Panthers had started those in the urban cities prior to the United States picking up those initiatives. They started feeding children as they realized the children were going to school hungry, and they started feeding those. Those initiatives are good. Those initiatives help people. But at some point, we have to be able to teach the people how to fish for themselves, because you can handicap a group of people as well. As a teacher, if you sit there and do the work for the students all the time, they're not going to be able to do the work when they leave your class. So our job, I think, as a Democrat, we should start working with the people to teach the people how to get out of this system of poverty. Because United States, the good thing about United States, you can be very poor one day and the next day through different events or whatever happens in your life can change, for the best. It might not be the same level as some people, but it can change. It can happen. But all of those programs, all of those initiatives are good, but we have to figure out a way to, I'm trying to figure out a good way to say it, to help the people that's falling behind. Because there's a lot of people that are falling behind. Because if not, we're going to have a permanent class of people that's going to be in that situation. And it's going to happen generation after generation after generation. Example, growing up in Chicago, they had projects. Projects were built during President Roosevelt's term, Franklin Roosevelt's term. He built the projects throughout the United States because a lot of people, there's always going to be a group of people that's going to need help. Anywhere you go, you're going to have to help people. But the projects were supposed to be temporary situations, not permanent situations. So with these projects, and I think a lot of people want to keep them, you have, after a while in the 80s and 90s, you had 4 or 5 generations still there, never leaving. Majority of people got comfortable with the programs that the government was giving to them. And besides the government coming in and say, let us go in and teach you all how to get out of the projects and move out and let the next group of people come in, it became just a permanent situation. But I agree with the programs that the Democratic Party stands on. I stand by the Democratic Party and the different programs, but I think we can always tweak and figure out ways to help people in other ways as well. Not constantly always giving them the fish, but teaching them how to fish, giving, just giving to them all the time, so.
To piggyback off you, Stephanie, mentioning the before school and after school programs, that was all Fred Hampton and the Chicago chapter of the Black Panthers. You could just Google Fred Hampton and you'll see on .gov websites admitting that the Chicago police and the FBI murdered him. It'll literally say that on our .gov websites because it's true. And he was 21 years old, and Hoover and the United States and the FBI were so afraid of him because he wasn't talking about racism. He was talking about classism. People who followed him weren't all just Black people. There were people who needed help, and they funded school, brand new textbooks for people in Chicago, after school, before school things, paying for lunches. This all came from the Black Panthers, and they were demonized. They were, they were. Hoover said that they were the biggest threat to American democracy and safety, and these people were saving our inner cities, is what they were doing. And to kill a man at 21 because he could speak well, having a background in conspiracism, I'm no conspiracy theorist, but we know definitively that the FBI killed Fred Hampton.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's much of a stretch that they probably killed Martin Luther King, and probably not much of a stretch that they killed Malcolm X, because we know they had infiltrated his group with FBI informants, just like they did with Fred Hampton. So anytime a powerful Black man who's uniting people is present, our country has quite literally ended that person's life and their ability to unite people and disseminate good information to those who need it most.
I wonder how many people know this. We had a discussion in our Amnesty International group about 2 years ago, and suddenly these ladies started saying that one came from Europe and one was descended from people from Europe. Both of them said, "Well, racism has nothing to do with me. I had nothing to do with slavery." And I'm thinking, what is it you're not understanding? How do you not know what's going on? How can you be in Amnesty International, which is always all about human rights? How can you pretend to care about human rights when you're not seeing things that are in front of your face? Yeah.
I think it's kind of an ironical example, but people who don't especially white people who don't understand or don't want to understand white privilege, that is ironically a very good example of white privilege. People of color never had to be taught what it is. They felt it their entire lives. And I've been around racism because it's just inherent to how we are. But whenever the first time in my life when it hit me, it gutted me, was my best friend in junior high and high school was an African American, came from the inner city. And the first time he came back to my house after school to, meet my dad and hang out with my family, we stopped at a Five and Dime that no hyperbole, I'd been in at least 1,000 times in my life. And not once did they ever ask me to keep my school bag behind the counter. But when Deshaun and I went in, they asked us both to do this. And I was, when I got outside, I was tears in my eyes, and I'm like, how are you not enraged about this? He's like, you can't be angry about it every day. It's just how it is. And that forever changed how I looked at systemic racism.
Yeah, I've come across the same thing, like going into a shop with a Nigerian or a Kenyan or an African, and they'll talk to me instead of the person I'm with. It's like, what's going on here? Yeah, no, it's once you see, and I didn't tell you my story before, but it was when I was I'm a huge fan of Florence Nightingale. In fact, she is my number one person in the whole planet. She's up there with Jesus, maybe even more so. Okay, you get it. And in fact, I became very interested in Florence Nightingale because the university, the hospital that my father graduated from medical school from, St. Thomas's Hospital in London, was actually built by funds that were spontaneously given to Florence Nightingale for her work in the Crimea in the Crimean War. So I was very interested in that. When I went to London to look at the St. Thomas's Hospital in 2004, and I saw this sign from Florence Nightingale. It was the first time that I knew Florence Nightingale had anything to do with my father's education. And I just thought, whoa. So I came back to Philadelphia. I learned everything I could about Florence Nightingale. And I wrote an essay about her. And I went back to London the following year, 2005, to go to the museum and find out more from people who were in the museum. And after I'd been to the museum, and I had a cup of tea with the director, he was very nice. I mean, people who adore Florence Nightingale, we're an interesting clique. I walked across the bridge to Westminster, and there was a statue of Florence Nightingale in Westminster. Of course, Westminster is the Houses of Parliament. Now, but what happened was I suddenly had this psychotic breakdown. I suddenly started crying because I could smell blood coming out of the bricks of the walls in Westminster and the blood of African slaves. It sounds totally psychotic. But then I actually had a photograph of that time, and I realized that I was right next to the statue of Florence Nightingale when this happened. And then I thought, what is your problem? Everything you have is because people have been trafficked and appallingly treated for all this time. And why have you not been paying attention? So since then, and that's when I started getting into African communities, Caribbean communities, African American communities, very different communities, very, very different communities. And I lost my career. My children stopped talking to me. I lost money, a lot of money. And but so what? The thing is that this is the original sin that we all have. If we're not working to help people, what are we doing? Now there's a lot of other horrible things that are going on, but this also too is racism. And in the questions that I asked, we obviously had racism in Nazi Germany, but their racism and the rise of the Nazis, that only lasted 12 years. Now, they managed to murder 6 million Jews during that time. But how many Africans have been murdered over 400 or 500 years of trafficking? And when I went to Zambia, which of course is East Africa, because most of the people who are, most people who were trafficked from Africa came from West Africa, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Ghana, that area. But the British were also in East Africa, which is like 3,000 miles away, 4,000 miles away, in Kenya and Zambia. And they had a different system of slavery there. I mean, they were treating people like slaves. I mean, the British were always going to treat people like slaves, but they did it in a different way in East Africa. But it was just as awful. And that's part of the problem. Africa is the biggest continent we have. We have more resources there than anywhere else. And systematically, Africa is being robbed of the resources because of international racism. Zambia International Airport is owned by the Chinese. I mean, how is that possible? That should not have been possible. But anyway.
But two, we have to, as African descent people, Black Americans, African Americans, Caribbean Americans, we have to realize no one can do anything to you unless you allow them to do it to you. You have to realize when you walk in a room, you have to realize, walk in a room just like you belong, just like they belong. Right. It's constantly keep happening because people fear, they feel inferior to a group of people. When I'm talking to my husband's friends and that's from Ghana, And I say, you all got gold. It should be nowhere in the world when I go to Ghana. So many people are starving to death, poor, just no hospitals, no schools for kids. You all have gold, a natural resource that the whole world needs. That's what we based our currency on, is the gold. Well, the white people got the power. No, power, you gave them the power. You allowed them to come and rob you from take your gold out there for a little bit of nothing. It's not, at some point you have to stand up for yourself. We all have to. You can't constantly keep feeling sorry. Just like when they came over here to America, when the American Revolution happened, they got tired of King George doing what King George was doing to them. And they fought. And they fought and fought and fought. That's why we have America today, because they said they was no longer going to take this. They are not going to be taxed like this. You're not going to come and tell us what to do. We building this country. We over here working. We doing this, that, and that. We at least let us be represented in Parliament. They refused to allow that to happen. So now we want our own country. We want this to be our own country. We want the United States of America. And that's what they did. But at some point, you don't have to have a war, but at some point you have to say, look, this is not going to happen anymore. The resources are, you can't just come and take the resources. Just like when South Africa, when they went on strike in those diamond mines in the 80s, right. They was about to shut the whole world down. They had to come and talk to the people and make amends with that, because it was something was going to happen. So at some point you can keep blaming other people for being racism, but then you got to look at the person. Look, you got to speak up for yourself. And we all learned that. I learned as growing up, you have to stand up. You know, Dr. King stood up. He said, no, this is not right. Right. You know, and making people aware of it. But it's both parties are to blame, Black and white people. It's just not just white people, it's Black people.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's everybody. Everybody needs to sit down and need to talk. And then First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt said, nobody can ride your back unless you bend over. So you got a whole group of people that are being controlled. And I don't know how, but they're being controlled. The whole continent of Africa, like you said, every resource that's needed by everyone in this world is on the continent of Africa. Yeah. And that continent is being robbed every day. But the people that's in charge of the continent are people that look like me, just like me. And then once they're getting those 2 or 3 people they're giving all this money to, the majority, they're allowing the other people to they are suffering there.
Absolutely. You're 100% correct. There's no question about that. And I've seen it. That's the issue. You know, it's interesting because Bill Gates, who doesn't seem to be anyone's favorite person anymore, I mean, he and Melinda, they understood early on that it's all about infrastructure, that the infrastructure's not working. I mean, if you have a whole lot of money and you want to buy a copper mine, what do you do with the money? You give it to the Prime Minister and the Minister. And because there's no infrastructure, the money just stops there. It doesn't go anywhere else. That's the issue in a whole lot of the countries in Africa. And so, you know, Zambia was interesting because it was like the most stable country, which it still is. But the copper mines and that dreadful man, Mark Rich, or whatever his name was, who was pardoned by Bill Clinton. Oh my gosh, I tell you. The barons own things. What we have to do is just fight against it. But this is my point. I mean, if we are fighting each other in the United States, if one group of people is so badly treated by another group that they just don't want anything to do with us. Yeah. I mean, that's the issue. Eric. Yeah.
So all these things we talk about here impel us to take action on our own. Nobody's really going to help us.
Right.
When I was 15, I joined the civil rights movement. And went downtown Chicago. I grew up in Chicago like Stephanie. And we were just trying to get equal education. And you think that'd be pretty simple. That's a fundamental need that everybody has. And the black schools were in terrible shape. So we demonstrated. And really that was a dangerous thing for a high school kid to do, but I knew it was right. And I then the next year joined the local NAACP, the youth wing, and we did what we could. So being white, my role was simply to help in any way possible with my black high school friends. Everybody has to pitch in and start working on righting these wrongs, even though it takes decades. I mean, here we are 60 years later from when I first started marching and demonstrating, and things are a little better, but they're still terrible. So it's going to be a permanent battle, but we have to take action. Like when Lois and I were out in Berkeley, we were part of a movement called the Food Conspiracy, and we helped the Black Panthers secure low-price food for the school program, for the breakfast program, which was great because that stretched their money and let them help more people. It's a bunch of small things. We worked on Ron Dellum's campaign to represent Berkeley in Congress. And that was successful. That felt really good. He was a wonderful guy. He served for 24 years. And then he retired. And I can see from the stretch of my life that we have to keep struggling all the time. It's a permanent struggle. There's no point in really talking about how bad things have been. We simply have to know that we have to keep struggling. We need the Bernie Sanders. We need Jamal Bowman. We need Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Lucy
We need to
McBath.
keep pushing all the time.
Yes, yes.
But the one thing that we're missing here is that women are mistreated all over the world. Even in this country, blacks got the vote before women did. Women are still being not promoted, not given the same educational opportunities as men. And this country is one of the milder cases. You can be murdered for having premarital sex in other countries. You get pregnant, the guy isn't at fault, just you are.
Well, yeah. Well, we grew up with that attitude, didn't we? It was always the woman was always to blame for everything. You know, the woman got raped, it was her fault. Woman got pregnant, it was her fault. And there's and we're still seeing that too.
Yeah, it's all the way in the Bible where they was about to stone a woman to death for her having an affair. And Jesus said, well, the one without the sin cast the first stone. The man wasn't there. He probably had a stone to kill a woman as well. But the woman was blamed for the affair. He was not there, So yeah, women are always blamed. Women are not treated right. And right. If you look at the CEOs of the different companies here in the United States, the women are paid less than males. So.
Oh yeah.
Black women are the lowest.
Well, I know that.
Black women, the lowest, but
they make about 80% to 80 cents to the dollar of their counterparts.
But that's a different discussion because at the moment we're talking about racism. Here, I found this wonderful. I looked through the Bible to see what and I found that a series of verses, Numbers 31, where Moses wanted his male enemies and women killed. But the girls, he wanted to keep them as concubines, prostitutes. Now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that hath known man by lying with him. But all the women children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. And that was Moses. And then later on in Leviticus 25, be nice to, essentially it says, be nice to slaves and set them free eventually. Okay.
And the Bible was used, the Bible was used to keep slavery going.
Well,
It said, be good to your master. They had every Sunday, that's what the slaves were able to be off, and they had to listen in a speech that was written by a white minister, and it was preached by a black man telling them what they have to do to get to heaven. They gave this notion that they have taught people this notion, especially black people, that, oh, this is just part of your initiation. This is just part, you don't have to wear it, because when you die, you're going to have this golden road, and all of these things are going to happen. So you suffering now, but you're going to be first in line when you get to heaven. Those are things they use to the psychological effect, and it constantly kept it, oh, I'm okay as long as I know that I'm going to see Jesus. I'm okay to keep living like this. These are things that help keep Black people in their position that they're in now as of today. Oh, okay, it's okay if I don't have this, or it's okay if I don't get this. It's okay if I can cost as long as I have a roof over my head, but you have a roof. You don't have to continue to live like that. You don't have to, but the Bible has been used to control the Black community here in America, and probably throughout the whole world and other parts of the world. That's why things are the way they are. That's what helped keep racism going as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I was thinking about this today. Jews have historically been oppressed for thousands of years. I mean, we know that from how the Romans do. I mean, we know that. But one thing, the Jews kept their religion. It was like 3,000 years. But Africans, their religion was immediately taken away from them. I mean, people on the boats from Africa, they weren't Christian. They were whatever they were, but their religion was I don't know. I imagine they weren't allowed to practice whatever religion they had.
They were not. They were not.
What's interesting too is in Nigerian churches, and as I said, I've been to a lot in Nigeria as well as in the United States, is Nigerians have their own religion even when they have the Christian religion. I mean, if you go to a Nigerian Pentecostal church or a Catholic church, it's nothing like a European American church or a European Catholic church. I mean, there's dancing, there's all kinds of stuff. So what's happened is Nigerians have managed to put part of their culture, part of their practices into the Christian religion, which I thought was interesting. Yeah, but yeah, making people Christian in order to oppress. The Spanish and the French were very good at that too. I mean, it's absolutely appalling. But of course, that's what the Romans did right from the beginning. I mean, you know.
That's what we did to the natives. I mean, the Carlisle School is not too far from here, and that's an awful tragedy. I mean, just think of all the all the unique cultures, languages, and religions that were just destroyed and killed because they were savages. And the Carlisle School made them take a Christian name, made them practice Christianity, made them learn English, and was trying to make Native Americans, you know, to fall in line with white European culture. And if you ever have a chance to go to the Carlisle School Museum, it's somber, but it's worth a stop if you're out that way. It's where Jim Thorpe through there.
What can we all do? You know, I'm always reminded of Wangari Maathai, who she won the Nobel Peace Prize in I think 2005, 2006. And she said, be a hummingbird. In a forest fire, a hummingbird just goes back and forth with one drop of water in a beak to try and put out the fire. What can we do to be a hummingbird? What can we do individually? I mean, obviously, don't be a racist. That's fairly obvious. But what can we actually do as a faith community, as individuals?
Having more talks like this, having more groups and talks like this, getting people out, talking to people, having open forums to be able to express themselves, telling how they feel, how they grew up, the things that they have encountered, because all white people, like you tell, they are not, without the white people, we would not have the Underground Railroad. It's sad that we had to have slavery. We shouldn't have had slavery, but because of the blacks and whites working together, they were able to create this system to help people escape. And a lot of the whites act like they were for slavery, and no, I didn't see that person. They were hiding people in their houses and helping them get to the next point. So just talking about how explaining, because growing up as African American, like I said, grew up in a segregated city, as you know, Chicago's very segregated again. And as growing up, I didn't, as I went to college, I realized, we were taught, okay, this is what happened during slavery and this, that, and that. They didn't tell us and go further explain to us about, this system, this Underground Railroad was developed by blacks and whites. White people also helped in the Underground Railroad. They didn't tell us about the marching and during the 60s that white people was there marching too as well. They were funding money to get the people out of jail. They did not explain. So we need to have an open forum and explain history, tell them about what happened, the things that actually happened in history. See, Black people could grow with resentment and hate in their heart because the only thing that they see is, we were slaves and this is what these people did to us. Everybody, the majority of people didn't own, what, that 10% of people own slaves. The rest of the people were just working too as well, on plantations, and everybody else was, and they oppressed the white male, or the slave master oppressed the other white male in the field to make him feel like he was better, but he was right out in the field with the blacks. And he didn't realize that the only person that was winning was the man in the house. That was the only person that was winning, that 10% that's still in charge today. So I think open more forums, more talking about this, getting people out, community events, starting to talk to getting our people out to vote, talk to our legislators, making changes in this country, because the changes that I'm making, especially with textbooks, Rosa Parks is not even listed that she was an African-American woman, that blacks had to go to the back of the bus. None of that is going to be listed in the history books. It's going to be a woman sat down, she was tired, and she got arrested. And that's it. There's not no further explanation about the things that she sat down in the section that was geared towards Black and whites. None of that is there anymore. So they're trying to bury the truth, but if you're going to burn the truth and say, if you're going to burn all this stuff, you're going to take these books out of the libraries and say this, so we won't have to keep on remembering that this happened. That means you have to change your heart. And a lot of people are not changing their heart because they still have those feelings and they still have those biases in their heart. I know sometimes we can't change everything about us, and we can't change the things we feel, because the things that we see, it becomes natural. But you have to change who you are. You have to look in the mirror and realize what you're doing wrong. Everybody. We can't change the world, but we can change ourselves. Michael Jackson. I'm talking to the man in the mirror. Everybody, if we tell everybody, just look at ourselves, look at our heart. How do we feel? What can we do to change? And everybody take those steps, the world will change. We'll have that utopia. I always talk about utopia, that hopefully one day, before I leave this earth, that we can see that we all live it together in peace as brothers and sisters. And that's how God wanted us to live. That we reach that point, because I don't think no civilization, regardless, I think that every civilization has found a way to oppress a certain group of people. If you go down and look in history, it's the different groups of people. Right now, if you go to look at the Ukrainians in Russia, somebody always want to be the bully and want to take control of another group of people to make themselves feel better. But hopefully we can get to the point that we can just live in peace, because none of us gonna be here forever. God promised us 70 years, and sometimes some people are living to 100, 105, 110. But whatever it is, we're not going to be here forever. So I think that we should be able to try to leave this world just a little bit better because of our existence. And I think that we should start off by writing down things about ourselves, things that maybe that come across. My father said that if a Black man cut off a white man in the road, the first thing he say is nigger. That's the first word that he used. Maybe, that those are the things that comes out naturally. So maybe if we go and just look at ourselves, me too, as a Black female, look at myself, all of us look at ourselves, look in the mirror, and then write down things about ourselves, those things that we might have against other people, and just start changing that, try to change every day. And we pass that message, just like Coca-Cola. You remember Coca-Cola had everybody standing on the road, holding hands in the 80s. Do you all remember that? And maybe if we spread that message of love and changing ourselves, and then we can have a better place. We can have a utopia. So.
Okay, so we're going to have another one then. This was always meant to be the first, so we can all discuss this offline, what the next one will be and when. And thank you so much.
Do you mind if I hop in for 1 sec? I just want to kind of piggyback off of Stephanie. So my perspective from racism, being that I study cognitive biases, is I personally think we can demystify racism by actually just talking about the components that make it up, in terms of our cognition. I think racism is bigotry specified to race or ethnicity. And if we bring it back to what it is, bigotry, and why we began having these kind of dispositions against one another, but like most things, there are just lots of variations, and racism takes on different variations. So it's hard to pin it down. Some of it's implicit, some of it's systemic. It's, for me, if we bring it back to that beginning, and it's just in-group, out-group. So an example I like to give my students is, if we see a bear, we'll say we're a caveman, we're primitive human, and we see a bear, our instinct initially was a fight or flight response. And we do that based on categorization. So we're stereotyping this bear as being dangerous. Now, what if you make that decision? Okay, I'm not going to go near that bear. I don't trust it. If you're right, you're still alive. If you're wrong and the bear just wanted to give you a nice hug, it doesn't matter. You're still alive. That's the important part. And then we exponentially became such a social species very quickly that we've shifted and using these survival instincts based on biases. And now we're applying it to things like social things like race and gender and class and those kind of things. So it's important for us all to understand and admit that we are all bigoted in some way. We are all racist in some way. It's built into how we think based on heuristics. We make shortcuts. So we learn these things when we're little, right? Kids aren't born racist, you learn them. So you can unlearn these things too. I think it probably would be a waste of time having discussions with older people, considering they're probably not going to yield much, but we can intervene in public schools and have young children unlearn racism as it's being taught. And I think we're actually seeing that. So, the generation that I'm teaching right now, they're 18 through 23, 24-year-olds. And I have hope that things can change because of how they perceive things and how, and their outlook on things. They're not just, repeating what their parents believed. I think we're going away from that, and that's good. So yeah, it definitely comes back to education, but I think we can make it very primitive and just say these are natural things that happen. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means we need to be, diligent about, making sure it doesn't spill into anything greater, because it's
Yeah,
just we can't stop.
I agree with you with the students that I'm teaching now. It's a difference. Even with my daughter, I was determined not to have her grow up in a place or going to school with just people that look like her. And so when I asked her, the first thing you ask, she's in a program over the summertime at the college. And I asked her, I said, well, she was talking about her new friends that she met. I said, well, what? She always say my daughter don't say. I said, well, what color? She look at me like strange, like what are their background? She like to say the human race. See, I can see a difference in her, how she's learning in school, because her school is diverse, diverse teachers, the different things that she encountered with is diversity. And that's what I agree. It starts off with, when we start off with these children as they go into the pre-K. We learned the golden rule: treat others as we have them treat you. That's what that's how we're supposed to treat people. So we start with these young children in school, and changing, talking to them and telling them, teaching them, having them in classrooms together. That this is just, you don't even have to make a difference and say, oh, look at him, we all the same. Just having them grow up naturally together is going to be an automatic, people going to realize that, oh, no, he's not like that. She's not like that if something ever happens. So I agree that we should definitely start with education. Definitely start in the system, school system. And like, go ahead.
And celebrate diversity, really celebrate.
Yes, celebrate. Yes.
So, it's that notion in the 90s and the early aughts that like, oh, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. Like, that's not helpful at all.
The most racist thing anyone could ever say.
Yeah.
In other words, because when people say that you're colorblind, I don't see color, what they're saying is, I don't see your suffering. It's really what it is, which is obnoxious. Yes, I've heard people say that. Yeah. Really
WGN, WGN is a station in Chicago. They had a commercial. It was in this community. Everyone was happy, and everyone was walking around smiling and just having a good time. People were waving, children were playing together. But the difference is everybody had paper bags over their heads. And so one day the wind came, and it blew the paper bags off of them. And then that's when everybody separated themselves based on their color. The blacks were here, the whites were there, the Asians was there. That was the most powerful country. Why can't we just stop looking at this and just come together as one? This country is going to be written as one of the greatest democracies that we have, that was ever built, but it's going to destroy itself because of the fighting inside it, And that's what the enemies is going to see. They're going to see our weakness. You doing this to your own brother here based on his race, and they're going to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
So I think that we should, some kind of way, we have to come together. And it does start with the children, because we can work with children, and we can work with young adults.
Yeah. A house divided against itself cannot stand.
Cannot stand.
Cannot stand. That's from the Bible too. But that's true. You cannot fight and then hope. Look how Russia's imploding at the moment, which is kind of good. But we want the United States. I've lived in the United States for 45 years by choice. I have all kinds of other citizenships. I could have lived elsewhere, but I've lived in the United States because I love it here.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I'm not blind to things that are really, really bad. Well, we should end it here, because and then we'll talk about the next one. If you think about it, send some ideas. And thank you, Lois. So I guess we can stop the recording now.